Varmt välkomna till denna intervju med OssDsigns VD Morten Henneveld. Intervjun kommer hållas på engelska. Morten, very welcome to Erik Bank.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me again.
Let us initially, before we dive into your very good second quarter result, could you please explain to investors what is OssDsign? What are your main products? What is the marketplace? And basically just give the setup for the company before we dive in.
No, I'll be very happy to do that. OssDsign, we're a Swedish company. We are headquartered in Uppsala. We operate today in 10 markets globally. We operate in the orthopedic space with two franchises. One, what is called technically CMF, so a cranial implants. And now we also operate in biologics business, where we have our OssDsign Catalyst bone graft. Both these segments are, to us, particularly interesting because they are the fastest growing segments in the orthopedic industry, and they are also characterized by very high gross margins in the 70 to 90% range.
That sounds great. And you recently reported very strong sales growth in the second quarter. Please elaborate on the key growth drivers as you see it.
Yeah, I mean, Q2 for us, and you see me smiling now, was a tremendous quarter. It was a record sales quarter in every sense of the word. We had highest all-time sales. First time we also hit double digit. We had the highest cranial PSI sales, the highest ever sales in the US. And we also treated twice as many patients as we've ever done before during the course of a quarter. So that was tremendous. The key drivers, or the key highlight, of course, of the quarter is the US, where we saw exponential growth of 155%. So that, of course, stands out as
awesome growth. Yeah.
As not something that we've reported in the past, at least, and also certainly not something other of our peer companies in the quarter reported in the US.
The pandemic, I mean, that has been a huge topic for a large number of life science companies, orthopedic companies as well. Are the effects over? Or elaborate on, what do we see there? Are we returning back to sort of a normal life in the orthopedic arena? Or what's going on, basically?
Well, let me just very quickly say, we are starting to return, but we are far from normal. There seems to be a very preconceived notion these days that because the pandemic is over, the impact is also over. What we saw in the first quarter was a very, very depressed market where the elective surgery index dropped below 50, which is almost an all-time low during the pandemic. We did see a significant improvement into the beginning of second quarter, more towards high 60s, 70s. Now, what we didn't see, and that's the reason I'm saying that it's far from over, we didn't see an improvement during the second quarter. So we still believe we operate in a market today which is around index 70, which for context was actually where the market was in October, November of last year. So, but we are reporting a very strong growth, which means that we are taking shares in the market right now. So I think with that backdrop, that it just makes our Q4 performance even more extraordinary. But no, there is certainly much to be done before we return to normal. And of course, the staff shortages that is omnipresent in the world, in particular in the US these days, is more systemic, which means that it won't just normalize tomorrow by any means.
Great. Let's turn towards the US market, which is geographically your key growth driver right now. Please explain why it is that the US market is doing so, and also then when you talked about the US market, go into the other marketplaces, and where do you see the dynamics there?
Yeah. Let me start with the US. I mean, clearly the big contributing factor in terms of growth is the fact that we acquired Sirakoss in 2020, and we launched that product, the OssDsign Catalyst bone graft, in August of last year. You need to work through these what's called VAC approvals, so the hospital approval processes in the US. And we started to see those really starting to come through kind of in the beginning of this year. So that is what we see coming to fruition now. Then we've also made a number of changes relative to how we actually go to market, who we target, the team that we have in place, the geographical footprint, and a few other things. And a lot of those changes were made during 21. So I think what we're seeing now is the sum of all parts. And yes, we are very pleased with what we see. It seems to be sustainable. We're seeing customer base growing. We see more recurrent users. So it really seems to be going in the right direction.
Touch base on the European market at the same time. What kind of market dynamics do you see there currently?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest markets historically outside the US has been UK and Germany as the two main ones. What we saw during the pandemic was that the markets were impacted very differently, but also they were dealing with the impact in very different ways. And that caused us around summertime of last year to reprioritize actually on the European markets because we didn't see, for instance, UK getting back to any kind of reasonable level in the foreseeable future. And here we mean well into 23 and maybe even beyond that. So at the same time, we saw some really big opportunities in France. We won a very big contract, which is 10% of the cranial market in France. So we've actually repositioned and restructured our sales force to really go after and focus on UK and France in particular as the main driver in Europe. And then, of course, we launched in Japan last year. The strategic importance of being present in Japan is very high. It's something that we also use actively in Europe, and we also use it actively to sell in the US when asked. Now, Japan is a long play. As you may know, it's very hierarchical. It's very key opinion leader dominated. So it will be tough work every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year, for a period of time. So we don't see Japan materially changing the growth trajectory tomorrow. It's going to be a gradual ramp up over time.
Please address the top fusion study and the PROPEL registry. Number one, what are you doing? That kind of studies, why is it important? Where are you in, let's call it, the development stage of these? And how can you use this in your marketing and in your close contact with the key opinion leaders as well as the specialists in the field?
Yeah. So I mean, so the two key programs we have are Top Fusion and PROPEL, as you said, both for our bone graft franchise, so for OssDsign Catalyst. If we start with Top Fusion, that was our first in man study. Right now we've been selling on preclinical data, which we also use to get the regulatory clearance in the US. So Top Fusion is our first in man clinical trial. Addresses includes 17 patients for 15 evaluable. So that study in itself won't translate into a big clinical report with statistical significance. What it does give us is some very close follow-up at 3 months, at 6 months, at 12, and again at 24, where we will get detailed information on the patients. We're getting different types of images, so really learn about what works, how it works, how fast it works, where it works best, and all those things will be extremely meaningful as we start to get more in. We now have patients coming back at 6 months so far, not for the full cohort yet, but it will be very meaningful. And of course, we also now have images that in confidential setting by our regulatory clinical team that we can start to talk about.
How's the interest among clinicians in the marketplace for the study as well as the registry?
Yeah, I mean, so the study is not published yet, right? So of course to go out broader in the marketplace, you need to have some kind of publications around it. What it does show together with our PROPEL, because of course the key concern is the safety profile of any product. Once you introduce a new product, is it safe? Is it safe to use? We now have Top Fusion. We also have treated, as we reported, more than 100 patients in the US, and there has been no safety concerns. So I think it's safe to say now that that we're not concerned about. We weren't before, but as with any medical product. So the Top Fusion will really give us detailed information about each patient, how the bone graft is reacting, what we call mechanism of action or mode of action. The Propel is a prospective spinal fusion registry, and what it means is that it doesn't carry any specific protocol as we do with Top Fusion. It's all kind of patients, it's all kind of procedures taking place, but what it does is that the enrollment of patients will be a lot faster, and we're simply building up a repository of patient data, clinical outcome, but also data that we can mine, so we will know exactly how we are performing for specific procedures, types of patient groups, etc., etc. So that will be extremely valuable for us to publish not just one big publication, but you can do many publications to really prove that your product works, and that is of course extremely meaningful to clinicians and to surgeons and the likes. So I think those two hand in hand would be a very powerful combination actually, and of course will also give us real clinical data, which right now today we don't have. As I said, we're using people.
Let me just return to the US market, which is huge, obviously. Just give me a sense of regionally in the US, what are your current strongholds? Is it California? Is it, that? Could you just touch base on that?
I think we're very similar. So typically in the US, our stronghold was and still is on the East Coast. Then we have also been building up on the West Coast, California, typically, and recently we've started to address some very attractive states, for instance, in Texas and Oklahoma and other more southern states. That's really where the focus is, but a lot of our focus, of course, is on the East Coast, where we also have our US office.
Great. What are your expectations for OssDsign the rest of this year?
Well, my expectation is, we don't guide on the financial numbers. My expectations clearly are that what we're seeing right now in the Q2 report that we send out, we're seeing much stronger growth, much better momentum, and the momentum seems to be sustainable. We are seeing what we look at the underlying metrics. We're seeing growth in the customer base. As I said, we're seeing more recurrent users. So what we're seeing is an acceleration happening in the company, and some indications, at least, it's still early days, that we've been turning that corner. A lot of people have been waiting for and are actually starting to see that real acceleration of the company. So that, of course, we are extremely pleased with.
Fully understand that. I think this was my question battery. Is there something you want to add before we finish the interview? Is something we missed or something you want to highlight from the OssDsign perspective?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we've touched on the key things we are also focusing on internally right now, which is the US acceleration. It is the mobilization on our clinical programs. And then the last thing that we haven't really touched, which is the fifth strategic priority in our SN25 strategy, is really around operational efficiency. Yes. Because that is one thing we know on the cranial implant is extremely meaningful. The faster you can deliver it, the more relevant you are for more cases. So that's something we've been working on intensely for a period of time. We have seen the first reductions, but that is clearly something that will also continue, both to optimize lead time, but through better lead time, more sales, and therefore also more scalability in the company. So scalability is generally something that we are looking at a lot on and improving both efficiency and profitability.
Okay, thank you very much, Morten.
Thank you for having me.
A pleasure to listen to OssDsign. Thank you.
Thank you.